Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker is well known and highly regarded in the Philippine business landscape. In 1959, he received his Bachelor of Science degree in Physical Science at the University of the Philippines, Philippine, Quezon City. In the following year, he received his Bachelor of Science degree in Geology from the same university. He then went on to Stanford University, where in 1963, I hope you don't mind me saying this date, but I think he's still a very young man. He then went to Stanford University, where in 1963, he received his master's degree, and in 1965, his PhD in geology with focus on geochemistry. He is also a candidate for a degree of the Master of Business Economics at the University of Asia. His numerous business roles, this reads like a chapter in the Bible of the mining industry. I'm sure he's written many chapters himself. He is president of WorldResources and Energy Incorporated. He is president of Atok Big Wedge Company Incorporated. Chief Executive Officer of Forum Energy PLC. Director of ISM Communications Corporation. Chairman A. Brown Company. But let me just give you a flavor of where he's been. Also, let you know what his past positions were. He was former president and chief executive officer of the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines that has brought you all the electricity. He was also formerly associated with the following listed companies, either as a director or as its president. Philex Mining Corporation, Philex Gold, Philex Petroleum, Philippine Realty and Holdings Corporation, Philo Drill Corporation, Petro Energy Resources Corporation, Dominion Asia Equities Incorporated, Palawan Oil and Gas Exploration, Seven Seas Oil Company, Universal Petroleum, Sinophyl Corporation, Asian Petroleum Corporation, Akohe Mining Corporation, Semirara Coal Corporation, Surigao Consolidated Mining or Suricon, Vulcan Industrial and Mining Corporation, San Jose Oil, Seafront Petroleum, and Basic Petroleum. Get my drift? He was also technical director of Dragon Oil PLC, a company that is listed in the London Stock Exchange. He is also chairman of various non-listed corporations. A. Brown Energy and Resources Development Inc., Shellac Holdings Corporation, and WAPCO Management Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak to us on the topic, the Philippine mining industry, prognosis and possibilities, it is my honor to present a highly regarded member of our business community, a respected leader in the energy and mining sectors, my friend, Dr. Walter Brown.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, let me begin by thanking the organizers for this opportunity of speaking before such a distinguished group of people in the mining industry. But first of all, let me explain two things. One, I have a junior author here who actually has done 80% or 90% of the work, Jun Yumo here. And I brought him in to help work this thing out because he was instrumental in the early stages of forming EO 79. No? So he gave me a background which I will use in the talk so that we can understand where the government is coming from. No? Because one of the things that's essential in order to deal with the problem which we face today is to understand the opposition, where it came from, what its motivations are. And the thing I would like to emphasize here is we are in a very unusual situation now. The other thing I'd like to explain, which is related to this, is the reason I changed the topic of the talk. It originally was responsible mining. I don't think responsible mining is an issue. Responsible mining is admitted to by the government as something greatly to be desired. It's the definition of what is responsible mining and what is acceptable mining. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is that I appreciate the efforts that the people in the industry have been taking to combat the situation, but I feel that we need to be much more perceptive and much more sophisticated in our dealings with government today. If you want to ask me the prognosis of the Philippine mining industry, as of this day, all new projects are dead. Is there any hope of survival, of new applications being approved? I would say you will have to wait for at least 3 years. Then you not only have to wait for at least 3 years, you're going to have to do a lot of work, and I'd like to spend a great deal of my talk on what work you have to do. But it's got to be from a different perspective. We cannot go forward on the basis that our opposition are a bunch of ignorant, ill-informed, unrealistic people. And I'll tell you why I can say that. As one of my activities, which wasn't mentioned, I'm vice chairman of the Board of Trustees of Xavier University in Cagayan de Oro, which is part of the Ateneo system. The author of the recent Ateneo paper on the mining industry, which is actually one of the pillars of government policy today, is Father Jet Villarin, no? Who is a personal friend, and I've known him since he came to Ateneo de Cagayan, which was about 6 years ago. I know Father Tabora, who was the head of the Ateneo de Davao, whom people in the mining industry there don't look with great favor upon. The new member of the Supreme Court, Marivic Yonin, who is in the room next door, whom some of you know. Let me tell you, I don't agree with him, but he's a very intelligent, very articulate person. What am I driving at? The situation today is very different from the situation we faced before. Before, we were facing a ragtag conglomeration of, you might say, NGOs, people's organizations, etc. Now we are facing a very disciplined, intelligent, highly motivated, and respected group of individuals who happen to disagree with us on certain issues. There's nothing to be gained by attacking them. There's nothing to be gained by saying that if we don't use metals, we can't have any of the finer things of life. They all know that. But they also know that it is not essential that all of these be derived from the Philippines. Also, the statement that the Philippines economy will collapse if we don't encourage mining is no longer true, because we have reached a level of economic development where it's a matter of choice. It's true, and I agree, that the Philippine mining industry can be the bulwark of the progress of the future, and should be. I mean, I'm fully on board with you guys on that. But to insist that things will fall apart, nothing will happen if it's not developed, is not true. It's a matter of choice. And the Philippines will survive because of its other resources. So we have to go on the basis of certain things which will become apparent as we go through the talk. Now, I've gone through the, can we have the next slide, please? No? You can see here that there is a very small picture of the development of the mining industry. And the objective of this is to make you aware that the situation has developed over time. In the early days of martial law, where we had the Small-Scale Mining Act, the Mining Act, and even after martial law, well, during martial law days, there was no problem. We had a highly centralized government. If you got to the powers that be, you got your permits, and that's why this was the heyday of Philippine mining. In the period after that, you had a hiatus of low metal prices and very, very negative ideas. Then you had the Mining Act, you have Mark Copper spill, you have various things, Dizon spill, Rapu-Rapu. Then you have the PMRC, you have the Supreme Court ruling on the Mining Act. But now today we are faced with the Philex tailing spill, which, it happened to me when I was chairman of Philex. And this is going to be a major contention point I will deal with later on in the talk. Because the government is coming out with a ridiculous proposition that, maybe I shouldn't be that vocal, but I've already said it. That force majeure does not exist. Our problem, though, is a problem that faces the entire industry. And this is the fact that we cannot make rational decisions if we don't have the basis. And the only basis in the future will be facts and standards. The problem is, in the absence of standards, which are acceptable to government, we will always be in a state of argument, indecision, and which will be a barrier to progress. So the very focus of the whole talk is to invite you and the rest of the industry and the whole country as a whole to come to some agreement on standards. Now, to give you a flavor of the development of the problem or opportunities as faces today, let's look at the next slide. We look at issues and drivers. What are the drivers? They are the civil service, society organizations, the NGOs, the people's organizations. Those were the first. Those were the people that were giving us problems in the past. They continue to give us problems, but they are minor compared to the problems we have today. The second driver, I think, was the Ateneo study on mining, which I will deal with in a few minutes. Then I'd like to say that there's the latest one, which is House Bill 3763. Have any of you seen this yet? As you will see later, you'll be horrified when you see what's pending in the House of Representatives. And this is another point I'd like to make. I don't think the mining industry has been active enough in working with the legislature. It is true that the perception in the past of the industry was every time you talk to them, there are costs which you don't like to pay. But they are an essential part of our government. And unless we do more work with the legislature, we're in deep trouble. And then I'd like to deal with the IMF study, which is the very basis for, actually, one of the bases for the government position. No? Now, let's just go rapidly over the issues that have been raised by the civil service society, organizations, the NGOs, and the people's organizations. And rather than dealing with the individual ones, I think the best summary of them was given by Christian Monsod in a paper he wrote in late this year, no? And he said, should mining be allowed in the Philippines? And of course, he said it can be done with the following minimum conditions. There must be a full accounting of the environmental, social, and economic cost. The government must receive full and fuller share of the resource value. Institutional capabilities must be put in place, and new capital must be created for the rural areas. The problem, though, is I don't think there's anybody in this room that will disagree with the statements of policy. The problem is putting a number on it and making sure that the numbers are achieved. And that's the problem that we face today. Now, in the past, the government had the institutional capability to evaluate and regulate mining. This was in the early days. Now, due to the lack of technical people and even the lack of political will, to my mind, they do not have the capability to evaluate and regulate mining. In fact, so if this is the case, there are no standard resource and environmental evaluations. The capacity for resource management is wanting. And then added to that, the enforcement of laws and policies inadequate. And this is illustrated by the article in the newspaper this morning about the deaths in Paracale district. This is a good example of the situation which faces us today, faces the government, and the government so far has not shown its capability of dealing adequately with the issues. It's an open secret that everybody that has access to the mining industry knows who the illegal miners are, where they're operating. And yet at the same time, nothing is done about it. So my friends in the mining industry, before we were, confident enough that somebody would do something about it, I'm telling you, unless we do something about it, nobody will. The government has to be pressured to do something about it. And it has to be done from people that understand the situation, and the only people that understand the situation adequately are the mining industry. But we must be able to transfer this knowledge to government, make them appreciate it. Otherwise, I don't see any end in sight to the problem. No? The next one. Well, of course, the sins of the various organizations were harping on the sins of the past, the various environmental spills, the fact that LGU taxation did not get to the unit involved. Of course, when I was with Felix, I had great problems in understanding why the Demogan bill was never approved. And the Demogan bill was to give the excise tax directly to the local government unit involved, until I got a very good briefing from Secretary Atienza at that time. Delia know this, no? He told me, Walter, if the LGUs will get their money directly, they don't have to go through the procedure they're doing now. And what's the procedure they're doing now? They have to get a release from the budget department. And in order to get that, since they have no clout on the national level, they have to go to their congressman to lobby with the budget guy to release it. So they owe a debt of gratitude to the congressman. Now what happens if this is eliminated? The congressmen will lose their political capability, and if the local government unit gets his fair share of the allotment, you might be funding the next congressman who will take his place. So it's not politically acceptable. So they say this thing will not pass through Congress unless the situation dramatically changes. No? Now, the Ateneo School of Government Policy paper is another thing. Again, I know the people that wrote this. I sit on the board of this with Tony Lavinia, Father Tabora, Father Jet Villamin. He's not in Ateneo now, so I no longer see him. But these are honest, sincere, dedicated people. If you look at the issues that they send up issues on land use, distribution of benefits, compensation, etc., cost of small-scale mining. And these documents are available to everybody. And I would say that if you want to understand their motivations, you read the papers. Because if you don't understand where they're coming from, it's hard to deal with them effectively. And you will appreciate the fact that you're dealing with earnest people that disagree with you. So what do? We find the basis for the disagreement and we address it at this. We don't say that they don't understand the industry. We don't say that they don't know what they're doing. We say, where do we disagree? And let's discuss it, and let me show you effectively what's wrong with your reasoning and why our reasoning is better than theirs. No? So the next, responsible mining. Next one, what the government should be doing, define policy, etc. The problem here is that I don't think anybody in this room disagrees with any of the observations that have been made by Ateneo. What we disagree with is the solution that they gave. And the solution they gave is they feel that the government lacks the capacity to define and regulate. Things should be brought to a standstill. And that's just what has happened. And the thing is, I'll tell you, this is a personal opinion. I do not represent any organization and this is shared by Dr. Yumol, that the President's pillar on which he bases it is this Ateneo paper. He knows the people involved. He knows that they're competent, intelligent people. They're not really anti-mining, but they are insisting on standards of performance which we're not capable of delivering on. And to wait for government to do it on its own is, well, maybe the entire ice cap will melt before this happens, no? Now, to give you another horror story, House Bill 3763. It changes the concept of the eminent domain in that the ancestral domains do not belong to the government. It defines them as belonging to the ICCs and IPs. It prohibits FTAAs. Private persons cannot do mineral exploration. It is reserved for the Bureau of Mines, and the Bureau of Mines is going to be supervised by the Department of Science and Technology. Jun Yumol had nothing to do with that. He was there, but he left before this thing came out, no? The maximum area for mineral agreements is 500 hectares, no? Now, this is, and by the way, the maximum term of contracts is 15 years. The government gets 10% of the gross, but the IPs must also get 10% of the gross. So 20% of the gross is off the top. This will kill most, if not all. Community development programs are not royalty payments. They're separate and distinct. Okay, and then the MGB as a scientific institution will regulate the industry. Now, the next one I'd like to look at rapidly is the IMF study. Why? Because this was the very basis on which there, by the way, Secretary Purisima is for mining, but he wants to get his pound of flesh. The problem is he's not able to define what it is. And the other problem is he has asked the IMF to do the study. I don't know if he's read the whole report. I assume he has. But he proposes the approval of one part, but he doesn't read the entire study, which shows that the IMF says that the FTAA is regressive and it's not competitive with other countries' regimes. And what is regressive about it? Because it takes too much off the top. Now, the IMF presented an alternative where 10% of the gross proceeds of the cash flow before financing charges would be in lieu of some of the royalties. What I'm pointing out is we cannot fight the fact that the government will expect for and will ask for more money. But the thing to do is to get together and help them define something that will work and show them what will not work instead of just saying no, no, no and trying to bamboozle them into agreeing. As I said, I can vouch from what I've seen that the President's stance on mining is not based on anything except his observation that he thinks it's the right thing to do. And nobody will influence him to change that view. When he makes up his mind, he digs in his heels and he takes a position. That's why I'm saying to come out with a very strong opposition to it at this point in time is counterproductive. What should be done is to work on the numbers that the more rational oppositors are working on and show them that there is a middle road. For example, they say that only a certain portion of the income goes to mining. They don't relate it to the amount of area. Of course, if you count the total amount that comes in from fisheries, from agriculture, from tourism, and don't relate it to the number of hectares that's involved, mining does a very poor job. But if you normalize it and compare it to the number of hectares or land that is used, and alternative uses of that specific piece of land, then you have something to argue with.